This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. This is episode 219 of the show. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the NFL Wire site from the USA Today Sports Media Group. My co-host, as always, is Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com. He runs the site that SB Nation has for the Arizona Cardinals. Together, we are longtime Arizona-born fans, Cardinals fans since as long as we can remember, analysts for several years. Some would call us fanalists. We've got inside and outsider perspectives. This is episode 219 again. Seth, how are things going? We've had a little bit of a hiatus, and my goodness, do we have a lot of things to go through. And we really don't even have free agency to talk about yet, but there is so much that is coming in about our Arizona Cardinals.
Yeah, it's been an interesting offseason, obviously the coaching change. And then basically, as you and I talked about, when we talked about the coaching change and then the initial staff, they filled out the entire staff now, but, the initial staff and whatnot, we've got basically two teams. We've got a offense and a defense here for the Arizona Cardinals. So we'll see how this all goes, but it's been really interesting to see how they've put this squad together so far.
Oh, and not only do we have that, but we have such fun rumors to talk about. It's Seth embraces the chaos. I'm right there as well. Embrace the chaos, Cardinals fan. We have gone from the team has gone from being terrible and irrelevant to the subject of pretty much everything, to perhaps the craziest rumors involving the draft and the offseasons. That's what we're going to talk about this show. We're going to talk about Kyler Murray. We're going to talk about Antonio Brown. We're going to talk about Robert Alford, the guy that just signed. We're going to talk about Brooks Reed. We're going to talk about Vance Joseph and all sorts of crazy stuff. All of that's in this best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. I imagine this episode will end up being a little bit more than an hour. So it's in the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web and more, because packing this all, we'll try to do it. We'll keep it close to that. But if it doesn't, no worries. You can pause it and set it back for later. You know how that goes. So let us start. Kyler Murray. This is the guy. This is the rumor in a way that continues to. There's smoke. There's fire, and people are going to talk about it probably right up until the draft. No one's talking about Dwayne Haskins. No one's talking about Drew Lock. No one's talking about any of these other quarterbacks. But Kyler Murray, specifically for the Arizona Cardinals, now he just announced that he is committing to football. He was drafted in the first round by the Oakland A's in Major League Baseball. Heisman-winning quarterback this last year for Oklahoma, put up monster numbers. Incredible playmaker. Great talent. Great athleticism. He's small. And then you add on top of that, Cliff Kingsbury, before he was Cardinals coach, back when he was coaching Texas Tech, he said on the record he would draft Kyler Murray with the first pick in the draft if he could. Now Kingsbury's got the first pick in the draft. Kyler Murray has declared for the draft. He's committing to football instead of baseball, at least for now. And on top of that, now Kyler Murray has the same age as Kingsbury. Everything's lining up so nicely for the Cardinals to go crazy and, select Kyler Murray number one. This is, I don't think we're going to get rid of this until they trade out and someone else drafts him, if that happens.
Yeah, but Jess and I have talked about this. We've both written about it. Like, one, this is kind of what we've talked about with the embrace the chaos type thing. Like, there's nothing wrong with just letting this play out. Like, there's nothing wrong with talking about it as much as you want. There's nothing wrong with speculating and looking at how, Kyler Murray fits vis-a-vis the Cliff Kingsbury offense versus how Josh Rosen fits, there's nothing wrong with comparing the two. I mean, let's be honest. One, it's not like Josh Rosen played to the point where he just deserves to be handed a starting job in the NFL as, a starting quarterback. Like he really struggled this year. And there's nothing wrong with that. He was on a bad team with bad coaching, but in the same aspect, this has been talked to. I mean, Josh Rosen has had those excuses made for him since he was a freshman at UCLA. So in the same sentence, I mean, I'm not advocating for it. I'm advocating for, heck, it makes for a great offseason conversation. I mean, what do you want to talk about right now? Do you want to look at free agents that doesn't start for a month? I mean, do you want to debate the number one pick? Because it's really only like three guys, unless you want to include the aspect of quarterback. So, I mean, we're not even there's nothing else to even talk about. So, and it's baffling to me to see some of the reaction and the vitriol towards the idea that the Cardinals could even think about it. I mean, I understand, and Jess and I both want nothing more than to see Josh Rosen become the franchise quarterback of the Arizona Cardinals. I mean, we're both Cardinals fans first and foremost. Like that's something that we've, yearned for since, ever. I mean, we had Jake Plummer for a little bit.
Really, we had 1 year of good Jake Plummer.
Right. And so all of it is just, you want it to happen, but you also have to be realistic in the aspect of like he did not have a good rookie season. In the history of the NFL, people that put up the numbers that he put up have never gone on to become franchise quarterbacks. Now, that's not saying it's not going to happen, but it's just the reality of the statistics that he, immersed this year. So it's even kind of weird that we wouldn't be having the conversation of, because the Cardinals have the first pick. Like, is there a quarterback that we can look at and say, oh, this guy is better than Josh Rosen? Now, again, nobody wants that to even be a conversation because everybody wants Rosen to work out, but it's still the conversation because of how last year went. I mean, last year was a total incomplete and abject. I mean, outside of Andy Lee, what good actually came of last year? There's nothing.
No,
so it's weird to see the vitriol come. I get it. I mean, I truly get it because we were told and promised, Josh Rosen's the most pro-ready quarterback, this, that, and the other. But in the end, sometimes it's just there are questions, and it's okay to have conversations about these questions, and we'll see how it works out. And in the end, I don't think there's a question of that the Cardinals are not going to take Kyler Murray. I think we would, if this was an actual thing, I feel like at this point we would be having, or we would know that the Cardinals have sent out feelers to gauge the interest on what Josh Rosen would, earn them in a trade. Like, what is his trade value worth? And we haven't heard that at all. I mean, that hasn't even been a conversation. The only conversation is trying to connect the dots between Kyler Murray and Cliff Kingsbury, which, let's be honest, there's a million dots to collect or connect. I mean, there really is.
I mean, Kyler, one most exciting player in college football. The shift in offensive schemes, where these college offenses and these type of mobile, the Patrick Mahomeses and the Jared Goff, the throwing the ball all over the field, the Baker Mayfield, that's happening. Like I said, Kingsbury was he recruited Murray. He's completely enamored with him, thinks he's a fantastic, tremendous player, said he would make him the first pick in the draft. They've got the same agent. The Cardinals have the first pick. I mean, aside from the fact that there's a lot of reason, I'll talk about the reasons why it doesn't make sense to do, but there is enough fuel to that fire to actually stoke the fire and talk about. It is mostly national stuff. It is mostly national, which is, frustrating here. But at the same time, the national talk is basically the source of any true stories that come about with the Cardinals, because here locally, for whatever reason or not, whatever reason, is that the team seems to shut out local media, local reporters from legitimately reporting about these things and not having them sound like crazy people.
Right. And the reality becomes that the Cardinals drafting a quarterback will be news until it's not. And you kind of said that, like, up until either they sign Nick Bosa or Josh Allen or Quentin Williams, or trade the first pick away for a plethora of other picks, like, this is going to be a conversation that's going to be had. So you're going to unless they just don't visit with, don't interview, don't talk to quarterbacks. But I mean, if a fan in a shirt that looks like it's an official NFL Arizona Cardinals shirt gets a cup of water next to Kyler Murray or Dwayne Haskins, like, there's going to be an article written about it from Pro Football Talk or from, Big Lead Sports or whatever it is. Like, that's just, it's going to happen. And again, here's the alternative. And I don't want Cardinals fans to think that, like, I'm trying to be rude or anything, but the alternative is irrelevance. Like, that's the like, don't you guys remember a month ago when the conversation was that the Cardinals were a racist organization? Like, isn't it just better to have a conversation about whether or not Kyler Murray is a better choice to be a quarterback than Josh Rosen? Like, isn't that a better way to be in the news? Like, it's just, it's crazy to me that there's an uproar about it. It's silly that this is even a conversation. I agree, but this is what happens when you're 3-13. This is what happens when you hire a coach that has a history of just basically, like you said, being completely enamored with a quarterback that's available in the draft. Oh, and you have the first pick. It's all really convenient. Oh, and then he hires your agent. Oh, it's all really, really convenient, Like, so it's gonna be a conversation that's gonna be had. And quite frankly, I don't see what the harm in just talking about it is.
Right. Now, let's kind of go over the reasons why it doesn't make sense, the reasons why you wouldn't do it, and then at the same time, why you would. So going over the reasons why not. Obviously, first and foremost, it makes you look stupid. That's something even like the Cleveland Browns don't do. You don't trade up for a franchise quarterback, talk about him like he's a franchise quarterback, and then in year 2, draft a franchise quarterback with the first overall pick. So, one, it makes your organization look idiotic. And the Cardinals have gone a long way from being one of the worst run franchises in the entire league to one of the most respected franchises. 2018 season aside, the Cardinals franchise has really turned things around. Michael Bidwill is one of the most respected team presidents in the league. So, one, it makes you look stupid. Two, the financials don't make sense. The NFL has set up their CBA, especially with first-round draft picks, to where trading them, especially basically first-round picks, are guaranteed to be on a roster for 3 years because their contracts are fully guaranteed, more or less, and it's salary cap hell if you do anything otherwise. Josh Rosen is going to count about $5 million against the cap this year. If they were to just cut him, that cap hit is now more than $14 million, which, I mean, yes, they've got cap space in here, but they don't have $100 million cap space available to where they can take a $10 million hit for getting rid of a player. If they traded him, it's lightened up, but it still doubles. Their cap hit doubles for just trading him. And so it's fun from a financial standpoint. It just doesn't make any sense in terms of managing the cap if you're going to be successful. And then if you draft someone and you see him and they've talked about him like he's their franchise quarterback moving forward, you have to give him another year, especially considering the garbage that was last year. He had a garbage offensive coordinator. They had a garbage offensive line by the end of the year. They had no skill players. Then they have a second offensive quarter in the season who didn't show really anything to keep him around. They gladly let Byron Leftwich go. But at the same time, he was still running out of the Mike McCoy playbook and framework. And so you don't have talent in the skill. You don't have talent at the skill receiver. You don't have a good scheme, and you have one of the worst offensive lines in football, some of the worst protection, and he's being asked to make some of the most difficult challenged throws in the league. Of course you're going to be unsuccessful. And so you hire a coach specifically to develop Josh Rosen, then to move on from Josh Rosen before the season even begins is foolish. So those are the reasons why you wouldn't do it. Seth, why would you do it?
I mean, the only reason you do this is if Kingsbury came in and said, like, this is who I want and need for my offense. This is who I want and need to make this thing work, my vision work. Obviously, it would be, I mean, honestly, it would be a hard sell in my mind for Kingsbury to have got the job by going in and that being kind of the conversation, right? That would, I mean, that's crazy to go and be like, look, I can't work with the guy you just drafted 10th overall. But I'll say this, if last year something happened, and Jess or I are not saying anything's happened, so don't take this out of context. But if something happened last year that changed the way Steve Keim and Michael Bidwill looked at Rosen and him being the guy on the team, then it makes sense to move on while you still have the ability to get any compensation whatsoever. You're not going to get a top 10 pick. It's not going to happen. You may be able to finagle the 13th pick from the Dolphins, and that's like super stretching it. Allegedly, the New England Patriots were willing to trade up for him last year in the first round. So would they be willing to trade the 32nd pick in the draft for him? I doubt it, but maybe. So you're looking now at a day 2 pick to get, for a guy that you just took at 10 and gave up a 3rd round pick for as well. But that's the thing. If Rosen bombs in 2019, then he's virtually untradeable. I mean, you're going to get a day 3 pick at best for him. So those are the only real reasons it makes any sense, is if either Kingsbury, which there's no way. I mean, you can't tell me that was the conversation when he was hired, or Keim and Bidwill are ready or have seen enough and want to move on from that. So, we'll kind of see how this goes. For me, the chaos is great. And if it's what they want to do, I think buying into Cliff Kingsbury is buying into his vision. And so if that includes taking Kyler Murray 1st overall, then that's just unfortunately part of buying in, right? Like you don't buy in just to the things you like. You either buy in or you wait and see what happens. I mean, those are the options. And I will say this, I would expect it would really probably divide the fan base quite a bit if they did draft Murray and trade Rosen for a pick. I think fans would be mostly puzzled by that, wouldn't you?
I would agree. It would be intriguing because new is always fun, and especially a player. But and here's the reason why you do it as well. If granted, Kingsbury basically won the job the interview because he came in and broke and asked the team to have game tape of Rosen so he could talk film and how he's going to fix him. So the discussion, basically everything's centered around fixing Josh Rosen and making him great. But if you want Kingsbury to be successful, you give him the most likely way to be successful. And if he believes that Kyler Murray is that guy and he will be better than Josh Rosen, well, heck, you already just ran a coach out of town after 1 year. Why not?
Now you're running. Here's the other thing, and Jess and I talked about this a little bit off the air. The only other reason is if you are basically aligning time frames between Cliff Kingsbury and player X, which is a really like negative glass half empty type of way to look at things. But Jess and I were kind of talking about this. Like, let's say that unfortunately Josh Rosen doesn't work out. I would expect that he would get 2 years to prove himself, unless he's just a complete like abomination of a player next year, or God forbid an injury occurs, which you can't predict. But unless he's just like a completely miserable NFL quarterback in 2019, then he's going to get the 2020 season. That's 3 years to see a guy kind of grow and mature. The problem with then moving on is that you're then 2 years into Kingsbury. Most coaches outside of like the bad ones, Steve Wilkes, get 3 years on to kind of prove themselves. Again, if everything's horrible the next 2 years, then, obviously it'll just be 2 years. But so then you run the risk of what do you do with, do you let Kingsbury pick a new guy? Do you let him bring in, I know this is so far down the line, it's a joke, but do you let him bring in a Case Keenum? That he's had success with in college and that knows his system and blah, blah, blah. Like, that's the only other, and I don't think it's a good reason at all. Like, I wouldn't advocate for that at all, but that's the only other reason I could see that the team would even contemplate that type of action, because you want to align your coach and your quarterback, but in the same way, you have to have faith that both of these guys are going to work out. Like, being like, oh, well, if we don't get rid of Rosen now, then in 2 years, if he fails, then we got to make a decision on if Cliff deserves a chance to pick the next quarterback. And like, that's just such a bad way to look at things. So in the end, I think this is just fodder. I think this is just talk. And I just think it's fun speculate. Like, I think it's fun. You think it's fun. We think it's fun. But
what's the other alternative? Because if we don't have this, then it's just, the Cardinals are going to pick Nick Bosa, which they're probably going to do. Let's be honest. That's probably what's going to happen. And then the talk of keep the pick, trade the pick becomes much more interesting with a dynamic, shiny, exciting quarterback. Even though Kyler Murray, let's be honest, once it's all said and done, he's probably not going to be the first quarterback off the board.
No, every person I speak to, every person I talk with, every dialed in guy in the draft that I trust, and quite frankly, I haven't really even scouted quarterbacks this year, because why would I? Has told me that Dwayne Haskins is the best quarterback in this draft. Now, some people may say this is revisionist. I don't know. A lot of people I trust have told me that Haskins would have been battling Sam Darnold to be the second best quarterback in last year's draft. So, the reality is this, like, we're all talking about Kyler Murray, and he's maybe not, like Jess said, he's probably the most exciting quarterback in the draft, but I don't know if he's necessarily even the best quarterback in this draft. So it's a really weird thing. And Jess, I don't know. I know you write about mock drafts all the time. So, but I don't know how much attention you pay outside of kind of like the top, 5 or 10, unless the Cardinals are involved in a trade down. But have you noticed that this whole, 3, 4 plus quarterback picked in the top 10, that's completely gone now. It's Dwayne Haskins and maybe Kyler Murray on some, but for the most part, it's Dwayne Haskins. And then every once in a while, you'll see like one more guy go in the top 10, but it's definitely not 4 guys in the top 10 anymore.
Well, and here's the thing. In the world where measurables matter, it's not necessarily because they don't believe he can't play quarterback. It's just they're not going to do a fully guaranteed contract. I don't know if he'll get drafted in the first round. We'll have to wait and see, because it'll be tough for a guy of that frame. Russell Wilson's had success. Baker Mayfield had success. Drew Brees had success. Kyler Murray, smaller. And he's not just shorter. He's also not
right. And he's a rocked up 190 pounds. Don't get me wrong, but he's not a put together guy. Like, he's not
Russell Wilson has a thick baseball player thing. Haskins looks like a slot receiver.
Right. No, I think that's a fair description.
Where measurables matter, and I think I saw it's not so much it's about they're worried about the play. It's executives don't want to throw that much guaranteed money at a guy where if he doesn't work out in the league, you can look at the body type and say, well, what the hell were you doing drafting a guy built like that anyway? That was stupid. If you pick him in the second round and he busts, or you take the big arms, like the traditional guys like the Blaine Gabbert, this and that, well, then you can say it was some other factor why he didn't work out. He checked all the boxes. Kyler Murray does not check all the boxes. So for every Russell Wilson there's out there, we've seen a whole other things. Now, Kyler Murray is extremely, extremely exciting. And at the end of the day, what I think will end up happening is that he will, like Lamar Jackson ended up being picked really, really late in the first round. It might be where that top of the second round is where the Cardinals start getting calls, which would make things interesting there. I just don't think ultimately it'll be the top of the draft.
Right. And the other interesting thing is going to be when the New England Patriots take him at 32, and then they just keep rolling on in their dynasty, and and everybody else in the NFL is miserable for another 20 years like they are right now. So
well, with that, let's move on to the next topic, which is even more craziness. So we're going to move on from Kyler Murray when we come back from on the next section of the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. When we come back, we're going to talk about Antonio Brown, because wouldn't Antonio Brown just be fun on this team? That's going to go next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Guess what? Antonio Brown there's more madness to this. Antonio Brown is an unhappy player in Pittsburgh. He has asked for trade. Well, this is nothing new. He's wanted out. Pittsburgh has not made any moves. He said goodbye. He said goodbye to the Steelers Nation. Patrick Peterson reached out to him and hit my line, bro. Whether that was to kind of talk about, hey, I went through the same thing, it didn't work out, so if you have to go back, this is what you have to do. Anyway, wouldn't it be fun? So Antonio Brown, premier receiver in the league. Cardinals need receivers badly, have a new fun offensive system. Doesn't it make sense? I mean, doesn't it make sense? How can you not be intrigued by the possibility of having Antonio Brown on your football team?
Well, and it's something that you and I have talked about. It's something that we see a lot of in these conversations about this, Josh Rosen window, right? Like, oh, you got the Josh Rosen rookie contract. So they basically have 3 more really comfortable years, and then it goes up pretty substantially if they pick up his 5th-year rookie option. And then obviously when he signs his second contract, it's going to be probably
$40 million.
By that time, it has to be over $30 million by then. If he's worth getting paid, they're going to have to pay him. So this whole idea of you got to take advantage. Well, this is exactly what that conversation is about, right? Like, you got to take advantage, meaning you have to find a way to stack as much veteran talent on your roster as soon as you possibly can. And so the idea of getting Antonio Brown, whether it's with pick 33 or with pick 65, is one that, every Cardinals fan should be excited about, because you're getting the best, or one of the 3 best receivers in the NFL for 3 fairly cost-controlled years for your rookie quarterback or your young quarterback, for that 3-year window where you have just as much cap space as you can possibly have, without having to pay your quarterback an absurd amount of money. So I don't know, like, I guess Gambo today on Burns and Gambo was kind of talking about it a little bit, and said, it's not smart because the Cardinals just aren't close enough to compete. And I get that. I really do. But you have to look at this as you have 3 years. So you have until 2021 to build as good of a team as you can possibly build, and take as many chances and go for broke, and whatever other, kind of line you want to use on it, as you possibly can, before you're having to pay the quarterback tax that we talk about. And like I said, everybody pays it. You're either paying it for salary or you're going to pay it in wins. Obviously for right now, it's cost the Cardinals wins, but in 4 years, the hope is that they're having to pay that quarterback tax and salary, and at least, they've competed for something. And so if you have the chance to get a wide receiver for 3 years that fits perfectly into that window that they're in right now, I just don't understand why you wouldn't, unless he's such a hard person to deal with, unless he is such a bad teammate, unless there are so many things with him wrong in the locker room, then you should be doing that should be one of the first phone calls you make, because you're trying to stack talent on this roster over the next 3 years. It may not work where in 2019 this is a playoff team, but in 2020 they could be a team that wins 9 or 10 games and is a wild card. And in 2021 they could be the Rams of this year, where they're going to the Super Bowl. And guess what? Guess who will be on that roster if you trade for him for this, now? It's Antonio Brown. So that's the thing, is you got to start taking advantage of that. You've got to stop. I see so many fans talking about draft picks. And at the same time, have fans not paid attention to what's going on with the Phoenix Suns? They've not paid or purchased any veteran talent. Not like Trevor Ariza 1-year deal. They haven't gone and got any true to life veteran talent. They haven't, they didn't want to give up Josh Jackson for Kyrie Irving. I'm not going to try to turn this into a Suns podcast, but that's the point. You can't just keep accumulating draft picks and putting young players together. at some point, you have to look at what the Rams did and say, all right, we've got the young talent we need. Now we need Andrew Whitworth. Now we need John Sullivan. Now we need Ndamukong Suh. Now we need Aqib Talib and Marcus Peters and all of these guys that you're paying absurd amount of money for, giving Brandon Cooks, giving up draft picks, like all the stuff that they did, because for right now, they don't have to pay Jared Goff. So they're just throwing as much talent and money at the roster as they possibly can, because in 2 years, that's all gone. I mean, it's gone.
Right. And here's the thing. If we look at what the Cardinals have been doing this offseason, they're trying to copy the Rams. And it's ridiculously so. They hired a coach who's an offensive whiz, and that ended up being Sean McVay. Now let's be honest, I don't think anyone knew what Sean McVay was, because he hadn't even been he was a Kyle Shanahan guy who worked with him, and the Rams were trying to find the next Kyle Shanahan. But the Cardinals do hire their McVay and Cliff Kingsbury. They don't have an offensive coordinator. The Rams don't have an offensive coordinator. They hire an experienced defensive coordinator like the Rams did with Wade Phillips, who's got head coaching experience, well respected around the league. Vance Joseph is the same. He was a head coach, and it gets even crazier there. Vance Joseph's biggest influence in terms of his defensive scheme is Wade Phillips. And so they're going to be running basically a very similar defense. So it would make sense for them to do something like Antonio Brown. Now let's not forget. So Antonio Brown can be a headache, but it changed the scenery. You imagine he could probably be bearable and even content. He'll be content year one. He'll be okay year two. If year three, then you can get rid of it. It's the last year of his deal, and there's no big deal. You don't have any cap penalty with that because you acquired him via trade. The part that and he's not. The other thing is we were talking before the show. So you don't get Antonio Brown. So yeah, he's making what's about $12 million a year with the last 3 years of his deal. The Cardinals go out and sign a second tier receiver in free agency. It's going to cost them at least $8 million unless they hit the jackpot with someone who hasn't kind of done it yet. But they're going to pay $8+ million a year for a receiver when you could pay Larry Fitzgerald a little bit more than Larry Fitzgerald. And Fitzgerald is, even with the production, if he produces the way he did the previous 3 years outside of 2018, he's worth $11 million for the year. So you end up with a receiving core of Antonio Brown, Larry Fitzgerald, and Christian Kirk this year. That's saying, hey, Josh, we got you covered. Throw in the passing scheme of Cliff Kingsbury, David Johnson, a new offensive line. That should produce numbers. That should put up mad numbers in the passing game. And then if Larry Fitzgerald retires after this year, guess what? You still have a number one in Antonio Brown. You can't, there's really no, aside from you've got a young quarterback and you've got a brand new NFL with no NFL coaching experience, putting Antonio Brown into that locker room, if the culture isn't strong enough, that's the other thing. He might destroy things. But then again, once he's leaving Pittsburgh, I bet at least year one, he'll be great. I mean, T.O. did that. Randy Moss was, when he went from Minnesota to New England, he was fine. But Antonio Brown, he's still putting up numbers. He's still going to catch passes. He's still going to win. He makes quarterbacks better.
Right, and he makes offenses better. I mean, he's an incredibly talented wide receiver. He's, again, the best receiver in the NFL, maybe. So to just overlook it, or just to say, oh, it's not, they're not ready, they're not close enough. Well, look, you've got a finite window here. And if you don't push it now, you're there's a real chance that you miss the window. And so when you have opportunities like this, you take it over spending money or spending draft picks on, another wide receiver. Even if it's 33, like 33 feels like a big cost, but let's be honest, it's 3 years of Antonio Brown.
Do any Cardinals fans regret trading their second round pick for Chandler Jones?
Right, exactly. And so, I mean, that's the biggest thing to me, is that this idea of proven commodity talent, you can't trade draft picks for it. Why not? Like, trade draft picks, like, go get talent to stack this roster, figure out the positions that you can use draft picks on, and then go get other talent for this roster. But if it's wide receivers, just you haven't said this yet, but there's a huge point in this of rookie wide receivers tend to not really be very productive. Even when they're good rookie wide receivers, they tend to not be overly productive. So by the time they're that, let's say N'Keal Harry, say the Cardinals make ASU fans and a lot of Valley sports fans happy and draft a incredibly talented, I would even say potentially great wide receiver in N'Keal Harry. It's realistic to believe that it's going to be 2021 before he's ready to produce at a level near a wide receiver one. So with that, you're basically saying, like, okay, well, we've invested in Christian Kirk, we've invested in N'Keal Harry, we still have Larry Fitzgerald. So now we need to, watch these guys grow together. But it's like, okay, but at the cost of Josh Rosen, like, are you going to be like, is a receiving corp of 36, 37-year-old Larry Fitzgerald, Christian Kirk, and N'Keal Harry going to be able to compete with Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, and Brandon Cooks? The answer is no. They're just not right now. Or they're and by the time they are ready, Fitz will be 38, and Kirk will have 1 year left on his deal, and Harry will have 2 years left. So now all of a sudden you're getting ready to have to pay multiple people. So that's just my kind of thought process. Is you try to accelerate the clock the best you can on this entire thing, because you do have a limited window where you can throw caution to the wind and make absurdist moves, if you will.
Yeah, that sounds completely reasonable. The comes down to draft capital. If it takes the second round pick, if it takes the third round pick, yeah. Well, let's wrap that up. We've talked enough craziness. Now we've got a little less crazy to talk about. Coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, we're going to talk about some of the additions the Cardinals have made. They appear to have their second cornerback on their roster now. That's coming up next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. And the Cardinals are taking advantage of the pre-free agency period and apparently are going to going to sign all the Falcons free agents. The first of which was Robert Alford, cornerback, 30-year-old cornerback who's been a starter for many years. He was released by the Atlanta Falcons, and the Cardinals scooped him up. This was not the waiver wire. He's a vested veteran. So at this point, vested veterans become free agents immediately, and they were mad. They won him over. He chose them to join the team. And with a 3-year deal that averages as much as $8 million a year, the Cardinals better have found their second cornerback. What should we see from a Robert Alford this year?
I mean, the biggest thing is just be competitive, because that's one of the incompetent. I mean, that's one of the things that, those of us that were ready to move on from Steve Keim, I think a lot of us cited things like cornerback 2, and they continued basically like, hey, we'll take care of this next year. We'll bring in a guy this year type ideas and uses. And it just, it didn't make sense that they continued to do that when they, when they had draft picks and the ability to draft guys that have proven to be solid cornerback ones in this league, when they had the ability to do, to use that money in free agency instead of continually addressing, the offensive line or the linebackers or whatnot. So it is what it is at this point. So now you're just looking at like, hey, is this an actual cornerback too? Is this a guy that can stand up and stand across from Patrick Peterson and deliver? And in 2018, he couldn't. And that's just the reality. I mean, he was maybe the worst cornerback in the NFL in 2018. But in 2017, you can have a real conversation that he was better than Marcus Trufant, who is a fantastic cornerback for the Atlanta Falcons. I mean, in 2017, Alford put up what I would say were cornerback one numbers pretty easily. And unfortunately, it just, it's part of the aging. He had an ankle injury. He never healed. And so 2018 took its toll. And at that point, when you're talking about 7.9 million, you got to make a decision. They said 7.9 million is too much. And the Cardinals said, no, that's good. We'll do it. So, now they have to hope that it works out, so to speak.
Yeah, and it makes sense to do. Now, kind of what the word on the street is that he dealt with an ankle injury all year, but wouldn't come off the field. So he was being tough/stubborn, and that caused him to. So that caused him to play poorly. Now, the issue is that what are we seeing again from Steve Keim? So while there is some excitement that they did sign a cornerback, but this is, by the way, this is the first multi-year free agent deal they've given to a cornerback since they signed Gerard Powers in 2013. They did extend Justin Bethel to do that, but everyone else has been a 1 year off the streets kind of situation. Antonio Cromartie, Tremont Williams. Justin Bethel was supposed to take over. He didn't develop, and so that failed. Brandon Williams was supposed to develop. He's never done that. And so this is the first time that they're actually, okay, we're going to do this. And it's in a way, the 2 years they're giving Alford is a sign to Patrick Peterson that they are dedicated. They're really trying. They're not just going to throw one guy out there because Peterson's under contract for 2 more years. The way Alford's contract is likely set up is that it's likely mainly guaranteed through the first 2 years, and then they can move on if things don't work out. They're telling Patrick Peterson, we're doing our best. We're going to put the best teammates on the field so that you can be great, and you're not just a languishing star on a team that is fading.
That's basically taking your golden years away. And I think that is a big part of it that we can't overlook is that there is, to a certain extent, the Cardinals need to not continually, but to acquiesce their disgruntled superstar. And I think that's a realistic thing that he was unhappy. He clearly wanted a trade. And I think that was the eye-opening aspect that if you don't do something, I'm going to continue to push for a trade. So while I don't necessarily agree that they had to just go and sign the first competent guy before free agency even started, I do think it was proactive enough that it makes sense to do. So, I mean, I don't agree that they needed to do it immediately before free agency even started, but the fact that they did, I understand, and I'm not going to begrudge that in any way.
Right, and the one of the pluses for that is the fact that at $8 million a year, the guy that they get in Alford potentially is better than any cornerback that they could get for $8 million a year on the open market, which is kind of nice. Now, obviously, the profile that they signed will be a concerning one because he's already 30 and he dealt with injuries a year ago. And Steve Keim does not have a good history of dealing with this is kind of going to the well again. Now, granted, he didn't really miss any games, but you look at, okay, well, he dealt with the ankle. Was part of the ankle issue being nearly 30, and now he is 30. And hopefully this doesn't end up blowing, because let's look at the last year of free agency. Every offseason move outside of the draft that Steve Keim made blew up in his face. Sam Bradford, terrible move. Andre Smith, terrible move. Justin Pugh, very disappointing move based on what we saw. On his on-field play was barely adequate, and then he got hurt again. And, he missed half the season in 2017. He missed a little more than half the season in 2018. And what was the thing that was the knock? They were worried about his durability. He got hurt again. And so you add to that, they traded for Jamar Taylor, who's supposed to be an established starting cornerback. He was cut before the end of the year. After that, they really didn't make any splash moves at all, because the rest were basically on defense. They were minimum salary type guys, waiver claims. And so you just hope for Keim's sake that he needs a win in the worst way at that position and in free agency in general, because this is the year that they're supposed to be able to make a splash. And if they got the cap space and he goes out and fizzles the way he did last year, it's bad news for him and bad news for the team.
Yeah, and it's just one of those things where, they're not in a position to pass up these opportunities, right? Like, they've got to try. And so with a guy like Alford, who, like you said, is an actual established, successful NFL player, it doesn't make sense to not at least take this chance. Because I will say this, like, he's not Justin Pugh in the sense that he's had multiple issues, right? Like, he hasn't been off or hasn't missed multiple games throughout his career. So maybe it was a one-off and it's just done now. So that's what you gotta hope, right? that this one works out. And I think it was a good risk to take, personally.
It makes sense. And with that, let's move on to the next segment of the Rise Up Sea Red podcast. When we come back, we're going to talk about another player that they claimed off waivers, Brooks Reed. That's coming up next on Rise Up Sea Red. We're back on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Brooks Reed is the other addition the Cardinals signed in free agency, picking him up after the Atlanta Falcons cut him. Brooks Reed, former University of Arizona star, pass rusher, played last 4 years at defensive end at a 4-3. Will come back and play in a 3-4, which is really more of his build. Statistically, nothing to write home about, but it is interesting, the fact that, and I had to go back to find this. So it was back when I was running Revenge of the Birds, what Seth is doing now. 2015 free agency, the Cardinals tried to sign Brooks Reed in 2015. And ultimately he took the money from Atlanta. But he is a guy the Cardinals are familiar with. He can play in a 3-4. That's what he's better at. He knows Vance Joseph. Vance Joseph was on that Houston, Texas staff as the defensive backs coach for those first 4 years of Reed's career when he was with the Houston Texans playing in a 3-4. So there's some familiarity. There is some skill set there. And the scouting report I got is that he's pretty much at this point, he is a good edge setter, run defender. I don't know how much we can count on him in the pass rush department. He hasn't,
he's basically Matt Shaughnessy, for those of you that remember Matt from the Bulls.
But every defense needs a guy with long blonde hair. So
exactly. Well, so there's two things to this to me. One, it goes back to what we've talked about with Steve Keim before that. Like once Keim loves a guy, he's gonna pursue that guy until he finally gets him. Come hell or high water. That's a Keim staple, right? Thus far. But the other thing is this. When you watch Brooks Reed play, when you look at Brooks Reed body type, when you look at things about Brooks Reed, he looks like a guy that could be a potential mentor for somebody like Nick Bosa, right? Like he looks like the type of help Nick transition from the 4-3 to the 3-4 because he's done it multiple times. To be a guy to show him the ropes on how to play in Vance Joseph defense and things of that nature. Like it's just one of those things that I don't know, if you were going to re-sign Marcus Golden, don't you feel like that would have been like, why would you bring in Brooks Reed to be his backup? I don't know. Maybe I'm overthinking it, but
that's how I see it too. It's sort of a Marcus Golden insurance in the fact that you get him at 1 year about $2 million. That's really reasonable. You can have him sit on the bench. He can start. He's not necessarily a starting quality player, but he's capable of starting. If you end up having him as Chandler Jones's backup, that's one thing. He's good against the run. It sort of lines up perfect to have him with Nick Bosa because you can play Brooks Reed on first and second down and then bring in Nick Bosa on third down and not have to have him worrying about setting the edge and the run type things, at least early on in the season. But yeah, and I thought kind of the same thing. You have to wonder if this is by signing Reed, they know how negotiations have been going, or at least initial talks with Golden and his people are, because Golden, I know for a fact that Golden wants to get paid. And then that's based on things you've heard him say publicly. Now, he did not have a great year last year. He's coming back from the injury. But when you look at a guy like Kareem Martin, who got 3 years and about $18 million a year ago, a guy who had really accomplished nothing in the league overall.
He never even had one season comparable to Golden's that season.
Was one of the best pass rushers in the league a couple years ago. He's got a high motor. I know the Cardinals would like to have him back, but you can't, he's not a guy that you can, especially with the top pick of the draft, especially when you're looking at the edge talent at the top of the draft this year, and then commit 3 or 4 years of $10 to $13 million a year to Marcus Golden if you're just going to go and draft Nick Bosa. That doesn't make sense.
Well, and the other thing is it may be one of those situations where, you want him back, but at the right cost, and he wants to get paid, and he's not interested in being at the right cost. And so it's one of those situations where, are you going to feel comfortable even paying him 3 years, $24 million? Like, I don't.
He's still going to want to play, yeah. And if you're drafting a Josh Allen or a Nick Bosa at the beginning at the top of the draft, why do you even need Marcus Golden? So I know not a 1 year deal. I'm pretty sure he's going to look and get
a 2 or 3 year deal.
A 2 or 3 year deal. And I don't think there's a way in the world that the Cardinals are going to give him more than one. They've got a Brooks Reed. And he's a good player,
and he is older too. Like
true.
He'll be 28 this year, so you get a 3-year deal, he's going to be 31 when that thing's over. And that's not old by any means, but like that's ancient in football years when you look at it. And the other thing is this, and this is just a reality of football. There comes a point where it's actually more financially, fiscally responsible to replace a player like Marcus Golden with a Nick Bosa or a Josh Allen, because they're actually cheaper than what Golden probably will want on the free agent market.
Right.
So when you look at it from that perspective, you're getting Nick Bosa 4 years, about $25 million. You're not going to get Marcus Golden for that. You might get him for 3 years at that cost. And so that's what the question becomes. Do you want 3 years of Marcus Golding, including his age 30 and 31 years, or do you want him, or do you want Nick Bosa from 21 to 25? And so it's just simple. I mean, it's just little things like that make a difference. When you have the opportunity to draft a guy that, initially as a rookie could be equal, likely in productivity and has a higher upside than Golden, and then you're going to be able to pay him less for a longer period of time. I mean, it just, like I said, sometimes it just makes financial sense to do that.
Absolutely. So I like the move. I'm gonna set aside my whole thing about University of Arizona and just forget about.
Well, let's remember he is technically a bench player because that's all they can produce.
and so he becomes, in a way, this year's Benson Mayowa. If you have to compare this, he's a guy who can start, who hasn't been a full-time starter, but is starter capable, at least early on. Only this year, it will likely be preparing the way for one elite pass rusher at the top of the draft in Bosa or Josh Allen, or if they trade back, another guy like that. And so the last big part of the show that we're going to talk about when we come back on Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web, we're going to talk a little bit about Vance Joseph, what he said, what he's revealed about his defense, and some other odds and ends. That's kind of next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. And we've talked about the crazy stuff. We talked about the new additions, but we've learned a little bit over the last few days about Vance Joseph and his defense. He was on the Big Red Rage. He reviewed a few things. And so there's some new things that we're going to find out. One, he was very descriptive in why he trusts the 3-4 defense. It was very telling how he talks about scheme, which tells you that in terms of his defense, basically there's 4 players that matter. And that's your man cover corners and your 2 edge rushers. And then after that, it kind of doesn't matter because the rest is scheme.
Yeah, and you in theory just got your second corner, right? I mean,
and then it leads you to believe, hey, Nick Bosa, there's you got 2 edge rushers. Especially when you saw what did the Broncos do a year ago when they needed a quarterback? Instead, they paired Von Miller with
Bradley Chubb. Well, and so this has been something that's perpetuated from the Denver media. So, I mean, I don't not believe it, but it's also, there's no way we're ever going to confirm it. But, the Cardinals and the Broncos allegedly had a deal in place for the 5th pick for the Cardinals to go up and take a different Josh Allen. And the reason that got squashed was because Bradley Chubb became available. And they're like, well, look, we can't mess this up. We got to take Bradley Chubb. Now, how much of that was John Elway? How much was Vance Joseph of what he wanted in his defense and things of that nature? I think those are fair questions, but in the same way, I mean, you're basically asking or having the opportunity to make that pick from the get-go if you're Vance Joseph now. And I know he's just the defensive coordinator or whatnot, but I mean, there's not, like we talked about earlier, unless you're taking the quarterback that Cliff Kingsbury sold you on in an interview, like his initial interview, then you're basically taking the best defensive player, because that's just the way the talent fell in this draft cycle. The best players just happen to play, defensive or edge rusher, and and then Quinnen Williams as an interior type guy. So there's not an offensive tackle. There's nothing else worth that draft pick. So at that point, you're just looking at it and you're going, this is the scheme. This is how it fits. This is what Vance Joseph did in Denver, and now you have the opportunity to do the same thing. And that's the thing. I mean, the Broncos were bad last year, but it wasn't really the defense that was awful. It was, again, a failed offense with the inability to find a quarterback to supplement what was actually a very solid running game. So
yeah, they went, I think the stat was when they scored 23 points or more, they were 7-1. And so their defense was more than adequate.
Right. And so you've got an opportunity to kind of rebuild that. And again, Jess and I have talked about this. We know Vance Joseph is not the head coach. We understand that. But I think when you look at the entirety of how they've built this team, there's also the reality that they look at Vance Joseph as basically the defensive head coach. He is the head coach of the defense, and he's a guy that will, make the make as much on the calls and those things on the defense as possible. And so when you look at it from that perspective, I mean, leaning on him as a guy that says, like, hey, this is what I need, this is what I want. If you're making this pick, I assume you're going to look at or talk to your defensive coordinator and let him kind of help to make that decision and that call. And he, his whole conversation, and then you look at the Broncos defense, even before him, with the Wade Phillips, the Super Bowl winning defense. Sylvester Williams was a first-round pick, but he was like a late first-round pick. I want to say like in the 20s area. And then I think most of the starters on that team.
Well, then you've got Shane Ray.
Yeah, you got Shane Ray that they drafted in the Sylvester Williams was drafted in the first round, but like Derek Wolfe, he was drafted in the second round. So you're looking at if they wanted to pick 33, Malik Jackson before he got paid in Jacksonville was drafted in the fifth round. So you talked about what they were, kind of the main positions, and you look at the Broncos construction on defense before Vance Joseph got there, and he obviously copied and mimicked that. They didn't overly invest in the draft early, in not premium positions, not in. They took edge rushers. They had obviously DeMarcus Ware as a big free agent signing, and then they signed, and then obviously the Von Miller draft. They had
2014 Bradley Roby in the first round, cornerback. 2015 Shane Ray, pass rusher.
And then they went and did they trade for, or did they sign Aqib Talib? I honestly don't remember. But they did.
Signed it.
Yeah, but again, they went and paid big money for a top tier cornerback. So when you look at it, their focus has always kind of been the edge guys, and on both sides.
Edge and border.
Yeah.
And border.
And so when you look at it from the Cardinals, they've not, and this is something that I've talked about, and has again been a pet peeve of mine, just with how they constructed this team from the get-go. And it's just they haven't built that way. They've built almost the opposite. They've built from the inside out. They've drafted, interior guys. They've drafted inside linebackers and safeties, and like they traded for Chandler Jones, and that can be considered the same type of thing, but they've never really invested in edge and corners. And so now we're seeing maybe the change in that, and maybe, and to me, that would signal that Vance Joseph has a fairly large voice in the room.
And a couple of things is as well to note to kind of preview things in the future, because one of the things this offseason about Michael Bidwill, Steve Keim, both were disappointed in the fact that Dayon Buchanan didn't play more last season, and it sort of opened the door for him to come back. Couple of things to note with Vance Joseph. One was a comment that he made. He says he would, as the Steve Wilks went nickel as his base, Vance Joseph said he would ideally use base even on nickel situations sometimes. I went looking back at his linebackers, and to me it looks like Dayon Buchanan probably will not be back, because Joseph uses traditionally sized linebackers. He hasn't in his last, and so whether it be Denver or Miami, he has had no linebacker lighter than 230 pounds. Dayon Buchanan is listed at 211. And as much as you want the run and cover guys, he says he can scheme a lot of that things. And so Dayon Buchanan to me seems like he's probably not going to be there. Hassan Reddick works fine. Josh Bynes works fine. And you have to imagine they're going to target somebody else in free agency. The other thing we know that we've learned is that Budda Baker will not be playing nickel this year, which will be an interesting thing to see. So we won't see the tiny linebacker, the safety playing linebacker, and we will not even see Budda Baker playing in the nickel, which means now the Cardinals have 3 starting safeties and only 2 safety positions with Antoine Bethea, DJ Swearinger, and Budda Baker.
Yeah, so you have to expect that either they'll ask Bethea to take a pay cut or eventually release him, right? Like I thought it was pretty fortuitous of Keim to read the market and sign or claim DJ Swearinger when he did, on a really cap friendly, less than $5 million a year deal. I mean, Swearinger and Bethea basically are almost identical in salary at this point.
Yeah.
So you have to figure that they have to do something. They can't keep both those guys and then Baker, because Baker is going to play that strong safety role. Swearinger and Bethea are more the free safeties. So, what are they going to do? They need that space for a slot cornerback as well.
And so what we have a Vance Joseph in influence defense. It's going to look like kind of like a Wade Phillips defense. And we're really kind of excited to see what's happening moving forward. And with that, I mean, are there any other odds and ends that we need to talk about in this show before we start going heavy into free agent talk in the next few weeks?
No, I mean, I thought the lack of college coaches on the Cliff Kingsbury staff, they kind of finally finalized that's his 2019 staff, and I thought the lack of college coaches was actually interesting, because that was the initial panic, right? That they were going to bring in like all these college guys, and once he couldn't get the one guy he wanted from Texas State, he basically worked closely with Steve Keim to get the coaches that he thought would work best. So I thought that was pretty interesting, actually.
And a lot of the defensive depth is that Vance Joseph has worked with a good number of these guys. So Chris Achuff, their defensive line coach, he's a guy that doesn't have a connection. But Billy Davis was Joseph's defensive coordinator in San Francisco a long time ago. Both Marcus Robertson and Greg Williams, defensive backs and cornerbacks coach, they worked for him in in Denver.
Yeah.
Their defensive quality control guy, their assistant linebackers coach was with him in Miami. Yep. Their most recent defensive assistant, Rusty McKinney, was also a part of his Miami defensive staff in 2016 as defensive quality control, and now he's a generic defensive assistant. So Vance Joseph has been allowed to bring in his guys he's worked with. That's really positive to see, because Kingsbury's going to have to learn how to work with everyone else. This defensive staff is very much Joseph's baby, and it's going to be interesting to see moving forward, and if they're going to be able to keep him if that defense looks good. That first failed job as a head coach might keep him out of it for a while, but it would be very fun to see Joseph be the Todd Bowles type that Arians had for those first couple of years, and at least see him see some great success, at least in the first couple of years before he moves on.
Yep, correct. So, no, and I'm excited about the offseason. The scouting combine's coming up in 2 weeks, so that'll be interesting because we'll get to see what Bosa looks like, and if he's completely healed like he's supposed to be, and kind of wows us like we expect to be the number 1 pick.
And that'll be it. So we will be back. I think we might give it a couple of weeks so we can build on. Okay, we'll talk a little bit of combine, start talking about the off-season free agent needs before we start, projecting what types of players they could target. So probably not a show next week, but probably the week after will be what we do next. And with that, that's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. This is the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back again in a couple of weeks. Go Cardinals and Rise Up C-Red.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up C-Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms, so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red Sea Red, and of course, Rise Up C-Red.